All right, so what are, just in your brain, what are some of the beliefs that you think you have right now? Just what are two or three of your top beliefs on life? So you're thinking about those things, and as you're thinking about those things, it may be determined on what you spend your time doing. So maybe because of the politics and everything that's going on, maybe your first thought was, I believe in big government, or I believe in small government. So you have this kind of belief system. Maybe you've been watching sports lately, so you're like, man, I believe the Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl next year. And so maybe not, but you might have had something along those lines. Or maybe you've been looking for a new car, and you believe this new car is the best car that's out there, and so you're looking at purchasing a new car, and so you're like, I believe it to be true, and now you're trying to convince your spouse that it's true, enough for them to believe it too, or whatever it is. We use the word belief and our beliefs to express our opinions and to express things that we think are going to happen in the future, but even more so, even if we're not able to clearly articulate it or recognize them, we have a core belief system in us that drives our actions. And sometimes those beliefs and those actions don't necessarily line up. I'll ask a good number of people, and even myself, if you have kids, you'll say family's important, but often you don't spend a lot of time with your family because you're so busy doing work. And so you may say you believe that your family's important, but your actions may not connect to that belief system, and so those beliefs aren't really lived out. And so what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is we're going to be digging into these ideas of what we believe, specifically what do Christians believe, and not only do what Christians believe, but do those beliefs actually direct our actions? Do they actually matter enough to who we are that they change who we are, that our core beliefs become the people that we are in our day-to-day lives? Now, what we're going to start today is on this Apostles' Creed. Again, you have your little card, and so if you have your card, the first part of the Apostles' Creed, it's kind of broken up into three sections. It talks about God, it talks about Christ, it talks about the Holy Spirit. In this first part, if you look, you'll see it says, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Now, that's a pretty big belief statement that you actually believe in God, because pretty much no one has ever seen God. There are a few people throughout history who said they've encountered God and they've had an experience with God, but most people cannot see God. And so it's very hard to argue the fact that God exists to some degree. My guess is that no one here has ever seen gravity. But how many of you believe that gravity exists? Yes, you do. Because if you've ever fallen down or tripped up and hit the ground, or you've ever dropped something and it smashed and broken, well, that is because of gravity. And so although you can't see that gravity, you know it exists because you see the effects of it. You see what gravity causes, how gravity has a cause on things and causes them to fall. I have a friend who had a baby this last 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now. I've never seen this baby, but I know the baby exists. I've seen the baby on social media. I talked to the grandmother last week of this baby who had just returned from Tulsa to see her grandchild, and she knows without a doubt that the baby exists because the first thing she said was, look at my granddaughter, and she was showing me pictures and telling me stories and explaining what all was going on and with her granddaughter and her own daughter and family. And so I've never seen this baby, but I would argue without a doubt that this baby exists because I've seen the pictures of this small child. I know the name of this small child. I've heard other people tell stories about this small child. It's on Facebook, so for sure it's real and it's true. And so there are things that exist even though we don't have the capacity to actually explain them or to actually say that we've seen them, but we believe them to be true. And God is the same similar way. God is an entity, a being that we cannot explain and that we haven't necessarily seen, but we have clearly seen pictures of God, or at least there's an opportunity or potential for us to see pictures of God. And by seeing those pictures, we can actually discover some things about God. And so before we look at a couple of those pictures that clearly talk about that there is a God in existence, I want us to look at Scripture of who God says that God is. How does God describe God's self? And so we're going to Exodus, the 3rd chapter, and we're going to be looking at Moses. And Moses is a guy who grew up, he was an Israelite. He grew up under Pharaoh's rule and in Pharaoh's home. And the Pharaoh in Egypt at the time had enslaved Israelites. Well, Moses' mom knew that he would actually be murdered because he was an Israelite boy who was born under the captivity of Pharaoh. And so she sent him down a little river in a basket to save him. And Pharaoh's daughter saw him and picked him up. And so they raised Moses in their home, and he didn't realize he was an Israelite. Well, as he got a little older, he clued in that he was an Israelite. And once he realized his heritage and he saw the Egyptians beating up his own kin, other Israelites, he got so upset and mad that he actually murdered an Egyptian guard. And so he ran out into the desert. And so he's been hanging out in the desert for a while, running from this murder that he committed. And so he's out in the desert, and he's out in the desert. He's taking care of a flock of sheep for his new father-in-law. And as he's taking care of these sheep, he has an amazing encounter, and it's recorded here in Exodus 3. And it says this: Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out of the edge to the edge of the desert and came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. And Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it did not burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why this bush isn't burning up." And so when the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "I'm here." And then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals because you're standing on holy ground." And he continued, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And so God is identifying himself to Moses to say that I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God who has been present and a part of your ancestry. And so Moses obviously is a bit afraid here, knowing the power of God and what he has learned himself. And so then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good and broad land, a land that's full of milk and honey, a place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, those guys, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all live. Now the Israelites' cries for injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." And so now we also recognize, we see that God is a God who is involved in the life of humanity. So God is a God who has been a part of humanity. God is a God who is involved in humanity and is aware of what humanity is doing. And God is a God who interacts with humanity. He's interacting with Moses. But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I'll be with you. And this will show you that I am the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they are going to ask me, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" And so the world that Moses lives in is a polytheistic world. There are all kinds of gods. There's gods of fertility. There's gods of the rain and of storms. And so there's all these multiple gods. So Moses is saying, okay, I'm going to go talk to Pharaoh and these people, and they have all of these gods. So who am I supposed to say that you are? What kind of God are you, or what is your name? And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. So say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" And God continued, you can go read the Bible and find out more what happened. So God is telling Moses to go tell the Israelites that I am who I am. Now, scholars actually say that this is a play on Hebrew words that actually is saying I am who I am is to say that I am all that there is. I am all that exists. And so I am God. I am over all things. I am, and you can do ... I am the creator of all things. I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God of creation. I am the God of grace and love and of mercy and of justice. I am that God. I am the God of everything. And so I am who I am. God was telling Moses to go tell the people that I am the God of all things. Now, the Apostles' Creed says that God is the creator of heaven and earth. And so I think that's a fun place to just start. At the church I served before here, there's actually a theoretical mathematician in the congregation. And so he was so smart, he just made your brain hurt. Kind of one of those guys you just hang out with and you just feel really not smart whatsoever. And so I started talking about creation one day, and I was doing this whole timeline and how much our life is and how it's just really just a breath in the whole scheme of things. And so after that message, he's like, hey, man, I got some articles for you about string theory and quantum physics and dark matter. And I was like, oh, send them my way. I'll be glad to read them. And I was like, no, it was bad. I was reading all these things, and they're so interesting. But again, it was so far beyond my intellectual property ability and whatnot. And so then he's like, let's go to lunch and talk about it. I was like, okay, let's do that. And so I went to lunch, and he would say a lot of things, and I just nodded my head like an agreement. But I had no idea what he was talking about and all these different theories and how things work and whatnot. And so in that conversation, though, I said, man, how does your faith connect with all of the science and all of the Darwin and all the evolution and all that? And he's like, man, it just enhances it. He said that when I look at science, there's all these things in science that actually just confirm. They're little pictures about how cool God is. And he said one of the biggest things is that we don't, as we look at science, as we look at the creation of the earth, the fact that we're alive and the fact that we actually are human beings and we are so intricate and so advanced in just the way we are designed that it couldn't have happened by chance. That there's a contingency factor, that something had to start the process or put the process in play to even make it happen. And he said scientists like to explain all sorts of unknown things as either dark matter or dark energy. It's things that they think are out there that are helping this whole process of the Big Bang Theory. And if you're familiar with the Big Bang Theory, actually it was a Catholic priest, a Belgian Catholic priest, that came up with the Big Bang Theory. And even the Big Bang Theory, he says that the Big Bang Theory is true because we can see that evidence in science, but there was a start to the Big Bang Theory, and so something had to start the bang, and that bang is God. But this theoretical mathematician, he was saying, man, do you know the odds of becoming human are so astronomical that you can't even fathom it? The fact that we're actually alive cannot just sort of happen. Something had to create it. There has to be a creator. And so I got curious in this last week, thinking about those conversations and reading some of the readings from the book that you're going to have the opportunity to take home today. There's a mathematician from Oxford. His name is John Lennox, and he gave us statistics of how likely it would be that we actually, out of just chance, came to being as humans. But before we get to that statistics, I want to look at a couple other statistics to put them in perspective. And so as we look at a couple other things, I went and did some search on other statistics in life. This is one of the things that I found. Odds of being struck by a car, 1 in 4,300. So about 1 in 4,300 people get struck by a car. The fact that you would die from it is about 1 in 47,000. So you're not too likely to get hit by a car or killed by a car. So if we look at the next one here, the odds of winning the Olympic gold medal is about 1 in 662,000. So first you got to be an athlete. You know, there's a lot of things you get, and you got to, be an Olympian and those things. And maybe you could live in a smaller country, so you have a greater odds of actually getting to the Olympics. So there's a lot of things that play into it. But so it's 1 in 662,000. The next one here are the odds of being struck by lightning this year, 1 in 700,000. So you're more likely to win a gold medal than you are to be struck by lightning. So you're in good, so you don't have to worry about the lightning thing, unless you're an athlete running outside a lot. Odds of being attacked by a shark in your lifetime is about 1 in 3.8 million. So you'll be all right there for the most part. You're more likely to win a gold medal or get struck by lightning. The odds of being the president, this actually depends on how long you live and how many presidential opportunities you have, but it's about 1 in 12.5 million that you'll actually be president of the United States. The odds of being canonized, so if you're Catholic and you want to be recognized as a saint, you're actually more likely to become the president than you'll actually be recognized as a saint. That's probably a good statistic. And so if you're a lottery player kind of person, the odds of winning the Powerball, these don't change, it's based on the numbers that are there they draw from, is 1 in 292,201,338. So you're more likely probably to get struck by lightning, eaten by a shark, being president, and winning a gold medal than you are to win the Powerball. Is the way that plays out. So, your odds are just not good, but people do it every day. Somebody's got to win, right? Okay, so this is one, it's really hard to see here. This is the odds of this. There's a guy named John Lennox at Oxford. He came up with the odds that humans would actually come into some sort of self-existence without a creator. And the odds are of the self-organization of life is 1 to 10 to the 40,000 power. Okay, now I can't get in, this is 10,000 zeros. So you would have 4 slides of this. Now, if you think about that for a minute, I put that in reality. There's a greater odds on this next slide of a tornado sweeping across the United States, picking up a chicken, a cow, some cocoa beans, some cane sugar, some wheat, and then when it gets to the other side of the United States, a chocolate cake coming out. There's a greater odds of this happening than life to self-organize itself. And even if you think about this cool factor, someone on the other side would have to actually be able to say, yes, that's a chocolate cake. And they would have to be able to put all those together to create a chocolate cake, which means that there even has to be a creator to make all of that stuff happen. So the very fact, if you're kind of one of those folks and you're like, man, it's just all by chance that we're here, it's really not. It's really not. There's a contingency factor, that there is something that has created us. There's something that has created the universe. There's something that has created all that exists. And so that creator, people often describe that creator as God. Now, it's a pretty fascinating fact to say, do you believe there's a God? It's actually easier to believe there's a God than it is to believe there's not a God. If you're kind of a mathematician, statistical kind of person. There's a greater chance that there is a God who has created things than the likelihood that that life has come to some sort of self-organization and we are who we are as advanced beings. And so you've got to ask yourself, do you believe there's a God? And then, if there is a God, what is that God like? What is that God like? You see, sometimes it's really hard, and we're going to talk about in a minute the existence of evil. Sometimes it's hard to believe that there's a God because we see evil in the world. And we see injustice, and we see such tragedy in the world. But you see, the God that I know and the God that I am familiar with is a God who gives us the opportunity to have the freedom to make choices. And the unfortunate side of giving people the freedom to make choices is that sometimes we make choices that are against God's will, that are against the very character of God. So what is the character of God? There's a great theologian, a lay theologian, and an author, a poet. His name is C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was born into a Christian home. But as he grew up just at a young age, he didn't believe there was a God. In high school, even more so, he was an atheist. He just believed God did not exist. And then as he went to college, he went to Oxford and Cambridge, and one of those smart dudes, and just big time thinker. He was thinking about all of these things in life, and he hung out with this other guy named Tolkien, and that guy wrote Lord of the Rings, if you know him, and whatnot. C.S. Lewis wrote some pretty cool books too, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters, the Mere Christianity, another great book worth reading. Well, the reason he wrote those books is because of Joy. Now, he has a wife named Joy. It's not his wife. He's dead now, but he did have a wife named Joy. It wasn't because of her, but it was the joy that he felt in his life. He didn't believe there was a God, but he couldn't get past the fact that he experienced joy in life. Even in some very tragic moments in his life, he still had a feeling that went above happiness, that went above the circumstances of his life to joy. And he was able to find joy even in the most challenging times. And he started to realize that if I can find joy in the midst of the most difficult times, then there must be someone who is greater than these difficult times. There must be an entity or a being who provides and offers hope and joy in the most challenging times of life. And so as he dug deep and hung out with some of the most smartest minds, he came to the conclusion that joy was given by God, and that joy is most clearly expressed in Jesus Christ. And so he gave his life to Jesus, and he lived his life for Christ, honoring Jesus and living for God because of the joy that he experienced. But not just joy. Humanitarians will say that they're, those people who study people, they will say that there's actually what they call a natural law. That if you look at different societies, even though those societies have not connected to each other, there's some fundamental natural laws that go against the law of survival of the fittest. The fact that we actually show mercy. The fact that we actually take care of the weak. The fact that we actually are willing to show compassion to other people. Those bits and pieces of life tell us that there's something greater than ourselves. And if there's something greater than ourselves, what is that greater thing? That greater thing is God. And so here's why it matters. You have to decide what you believe. And do you believe there's a God, and did that God create things? If you're a total kind of knowledge, science engineer, the mathematics would actually move you to the direction of God. But if you're someone who's experienced joy and compassion and a desire to help those who are weak and are in need, that desire comes from something greater than yourself. That desire comes from God. So if we believe that God is the creator of things, and we believe that that God is a God of love and compassion and life, how do those beliefs guide and direct our lives? If God is the creator of things, then we should trust God with creation. We should be good stewards of creation. We should take care of and be good stewards of our resources and the things around us. But we should also trust God in our created day-to-day life, that if God has created and in control of these things, then we should trust God with those things. So things like worry and where we find purpose, those things should come from God. That we no longer worry because we trust God with the purpose of our life. But then the other one, which is maybe even more important, trusting God with our life is certainly important. But if we're going to trust God with our life, if we believe that God is a God of compassion and of love, are we people and beings that live with compassion and love towards others? Do we show mercy? Do we offer grace? Are we kind? If we believe there's a God, and that God is the creator of all things, and that God is a God of love, then we should want to be like God, creating and being people of love in this world. And so I ask you, what do you believe? And do those beliefs matter to you in your daily life?